Welcome to another episode of the podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Our guests this week are Chris Chamberlin and DJ Murakami. Between the two of them, they have multiple decades of coaching and training experience. If you've seen them on social media, you know they're not only cutting edge minds, but they also walk the talk. They're very strong individuals and well-versed in a variety of movement styles and practices. Together, they have also created a training course called Chi Torque, and are on the level of muscle torques. Julien Pineau, who was a guest a while back on the podcast, has a brilliant classification system on muscles and the way the body produces torque called torque chains. And the idea of torque chains with an internal torque system and an external torque system can really simplify our understanding of movement. It's something we can see in terms of different athletes' muscular developments. And just recommended reading too. If you haven't listened to that episode or you're not familiar, I do have a little bit of information on that, such as a visual of the body and the related muscles of those chains on the show notes on justflysports.com. But on this show, Chris and DJ will be discussing their adaptation of the torque chains idea, also intermixed with some ideas from David Weck and the coiling and the splitting of the body. And they'll be talking about how they use that information to design a training session, a training week, how to work with athletes of different populations and backgrounds. We'll have a lot of implications on running and dynamic performance, the psychology of movement, and various adaptations. This and much more on the show. These two are such brilliant minds, and I absolutely love this conversation on muscle chains, balance, and performance. Let's get on to episode 416 of the show. Chris, DJ, welcome to the show. I'm excited to talk about Chi Torque, the shadow template, training with torque chains. Really excited for this conversation. And the first thing I'd like to ask you guys is just how did you guys first meet, and what brought you together in the process of physical training?
Yeah, I mean, DJ. So I met DJ. Actually, DJ was my headmaster in the online movement university. I don't know if you want to drop anything on that, DJ.
No, but yeah. Well, I remember Chris through social media back when he was Savage Protocols. He is the most like farm boy strong person I've ever met in real life. So I automatically respected what he had to say. And you were working with Weck at the time, and I was working with mentoring under Julien Pineau.
Mm-hmm.
And you came to me about what you were experimenting with, coiling.
Yeah.
And I remember I was trying to figure it out, like what this thing was. And I could only figure it out through the torque principles. That's how I was connecting it. And then that opened up a whole nother realm. So that's when we were like,
I know, yeah. Me and you would just sit with
deep
each
in
other
the
and be like, "Oh my
experiment,
god, yeah!" Like, what is this? Yeah. So you introduced the whole concept of torque to me from Julien. So you're pretty much my mentor on that, which is awesome. So thank you, DJ.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of like we were trying to create a model of all these patterns that or I guess you could say these different constraints. We were trying to create the constraints, define them, create a language. And, that was our goal when we were just playing around with all this stuff at first.
Yeah, between I feel like with David Weck and Julien Pineau, they've both been on the show, and I think most people listening are very familiar with David and the coiling. More people are getting familiar with Julien. What do you guys feel like? I mean, they're obviously like the spiraling piece is very similar, but what do you think was the biggest similarities between the way they think, and what are some of the biggest differences that you saw?
I would say the splitting stuff would be the big change that I think we sort of we played around with, because me starting to learn that language via DJ, I started recognizing like what me and David were working on, the idea of coiling and the different opportunities in torque that you could explore there, and avenues that were specific to like sports specific behaviors and very specific concepts and stuff like that. So I think that's what me and DJ were navigating and trying to like develop language around and figure out.
Yeah, so we were primarily looking at the chains of muscles bilaterally creating torque, internal and external. And then what I saw Chris and David were really going like deep, like a PhD process into spiraling this torque as deep as they could through their body. And I'm like, oh, well, you could mix and split the torque. So you could do it the other way. You could do it in this pattern, that pattern. And we could just kept, it's funny because it was kind of like intellectual at first. And then we started, all right, let's see what happens when we do this. So it gave us all these movement exploration kind of tasks where you could, I mean, that's kind of where I saw we're both seeing this in sport, athletics, and everyone's tapping into this, but it wasn't really verbalized or the pattern wasn't really highlighted. So yeah, it was a whole world. We were geeking out on it.
Yeah, it was recognizing these different strategies of movement you could do. And like a lot of people were doing them in their own realms or whatever. And there just wasn't a way to talk about it. And they were just like underclassified in a sense, like different patterns. And I think the more you start seeing it in certain behaviors, you're able to utilize the specific constraints that we sort of help map out and attack goal specific things you're working on just much easier. So at least that's how I use it at this point.
Yeah, just to maybe clarify terms too before we get any deeper, because I think if people are just jumping in and it's like David Weck, coiling, internal torques, just to lay some of the ground, and as well as you can do over audio, I think that's its own skill in some sense, just because it's nice to have. And I know with the Chi Torque piece or the course you guys did together, you have the emojis. If you can distill it to an emoji, there's something that's helpful with that. But it almost seems like maybe a way of putting it is, if you have this pyramid, it started with push pull, maybe as old as training. Okay, do a push, do a pull, like that was almost like square one. And then the next layer, or maybe there were some layers before that, but then Julien, it was, okay, well, it's not just push pull. There's torque, that everything where the force is going to the inside, like squeezing a sandbag, or force is going to more to the outside, like the knees going out in a sumo deadlift. And then, so basically what you're saying is the thing beyond that was almost connecting it into the gait cycle now, where now we're segmenting it into the one side of the body is doing one thing and the other side is now doing the other.
Yeah, that was the spiral idea. That was the concept of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think everyone too, all these systems are, there's the upper lower cross, model. And then you see the expansion compression model, phasic tonic muscles, I think used to be a big one. So everyone's kind of highlighting these different things, and some of them go pretty complex. But this one just resonated with me. And I think it for me, I see it as fundamental, which is helpful. But yeah, I think everyone's kind of picking up on these different strategies.
Yeah, in some ways, I was almost going to say there could be a layer that preceded like training. Like it started with push pull, and then you turned it. They learned about torques with Julien, and then there's the gait. But before all that, it was just drag something through the woods, swing a stick, throw. It was like almost all there, and then we had to restart all over again to redefine it in a way. And I think we're just kind of getting into that place where we do see those definitions, where you could define, and maybe in a way it makes, like when we say the weight room is general, well, if you don't have the other definitions of things, it is. Like if all you have is push pull, yeah, that's going to be something that's general. But as soon as you can say, okay, well, this is the way the torque's going, now you have something that can connect, if you wish, to a movement. Or for anything else, it would just be, muscle balance and a better way to balance the body, I guess you could say.
Yeah, because then it's like push pull how, right? You could push pull in certain ways. I think Chris was showing me like pictures of gymnasts, and you're like, oh, there's two clear strategies of doing the same exact movement. But when you look for coaching on that, it's all the same cues, and they're not really seeing that people are figuring out different ways to access the same task, same skill. So, sometimes it's helpful to say, like going into kind of how I use it, could be an assessment like, oh, this strategy is off the table. We can't use it. So that's something we could add for movement options, movement variability. or this strategy might be better for your sport, might be more practical, you might get more out of it. So now it's just more, tools in the toolbox.
I would agree with that. The big thing, the way I use it the most is like, I just lay somebody out in front of me. I'll tend to put them through some exercises without a lot of coaching or cueing out the gate, and sort of just look at how somebody's moving, or maybe how it would be my perception of maybe how they're moving through the chains. But sort of like, if they feel good or things are there, then I can ride that version of it and recognize that their body has already pre-established a strategy in a way, rather than me like using this whole cueing system off of just what I've heard off of specific exercises that maybe don't relate to the strategy their body already uses. And I can amplify that. And then if they're feeling like they're not very like selling at the strategy or at whatever their task is, then I can explore a different route of that with them and see if that creates some level of performance increase or feel better or whatever the goal is or whatever the person's coming at. But I tend to sort of listen to what the body's already doing or what I'm seeing from somebody, and I'll like amplify it if all feels good, or I'll try the opposition of it if it's not.
Yeah. Let's just quickly too, I kind of alluded to, but let's start with some of the definitions of those strategies. Like, I know there's fire, ice, water, smoke. I'm probably missing one. Spiral. I mean, and it was just one of those things, like I felt like a kid discovering a whole new thing when I was going through how you two had laid it out. And it was so fun for me. And even going through the template and the shadow template and looking at how the training combined. But you two had mentioned it, like a gymnast. I think you were saying a gymnast could do like a push-up or a press or a planche or whatever movement it was. But there's like, you have people who might do pushing and they might be more of a fire type pusher. They might be more of an ice type pusher. Could you guys go through the main strategies? And then maybe let's go through some examples of how athletes might do the same movement, but do it with a different strategy. Because I think that'll help people to, one, understand where you guys are coming from. And then two, see, I think when you can, I know my mind works like this with associations. Like I need an association or I'm totally lost. That's just kind of how my mind goes. So that's really helpful for me to see that. So if you guys want to dig into that a little bit, just to give some clarity there with how you guys have taken those torques and classified them.
Yeah,
how about I say some bilateral stuff, and then Chris, do you want to give some?
Yeah, I'll give us some examples
of some unilateral spiraling. So, sure. I think an easy one to visualize is like for hinging, like a powerlifting sumo deadlift would be more toward the ET. So that's the fire. And then for ice, we could think like a hinge, or the first part of picking up a stone or sandbag. And then for pressing, if you're pressing sandbag or boulder versus like jerking a barbell. For pulling, you think of like a strict gymnastics hollow pull-up for ice. And for fire would be something like a wide grip, extending out bodybuilding one. Even dynamically, you could think like kipping would be water, which water we're saying is concentrically driven by ice. And then you cycle through fire, eccentric, concentric ice. So water would be like a kipping pull-up. And then you can reverse that, like a butterfly pull-up would be the opposite. That would be smoke, which we're saying is concentrically the fire, eccentrically the ice.
Interesting. And
that's the cool thing about this is
ET meant external torque, IT internal torque. Just to clarify that, right?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. I'll get a lot of things to go through.
I would say I love that, because like that just demonstrates the ability for different strategies to accomplish get chin over bar, like just that example of those pull-ups. So I think if you can sort of ride on a singular thought like that and explore all the options, it really helps start understanding what we're after when we're talking about torque. But some like examples of it for locomotion, so something that might have a split variation to it. I'll just talk about running. That makes a lot of sense. I think there are a lot of different strategies different people go to, but the ones that I would see most common with somebody would be like a sprinter, somebody running under 100 meters, whatever. I'll say that they're typically an IT athlete is what I would typically see. And then, and some people, when they kind of get to the breakaway, I'll see them make a transition at that point from what I have seen as a common strategy. And then when I watch like a long distance or endurance athlete runner, somebody that jogs heavily, I tend to see a lot more of the ET sort of expression of it, like the emphasis on it. Those would be the biggies for me. And then like throwing a ball or something that there would be like this spiraling action between the two sides of it, which I've seen sort of happen both ways depending on how you're trying to throw the ball. But typically like a pitch I would see go from like IT to ET to IT as they're moving through it and things like that. And it just gets more compound. So the exploration and the bilateral stuff tends to be the best place to associate to it, I have found. And I'm sure you would agree on that, DJ. And then taking that information and bringing it to those really complex things where there's tends to be a lot of technical stuff that like a sports specific coach or something would have little nuanced things they want to talk about outside of how the tissue would be moving, but they can sort of help educate those underlying cues that go into those patterns as well.
Yeah, that the whole thing with it too, and back to what you were saying, DJ. I mean, I have a couple of thoughts with that, and one is that I think the weight room as it's commonly coached, at least traditionally, is very, very external torque driven or fire. It's just like, pushing knees out and like the way that things are pressed and even like bending the bar with your hands, those kind of things. I feel like it tends to run more external torque than internal in many ways. I mean, sometimes it's inescapable. I think the bottom of a squat, a traditional squat, you kind of have to get out of it. But it's one of those things that it does go beyond push and pull because, and like I know DJ, you do a lot of like rock lifting, and I'm sure you guys both, even like anything that's like crush oriented sandbags, it has such a different feel to it. But a lot of times we would just think, oh well, that's just lifting something functional. We just say, oh, that's just functional. I mean, it's all functional, right? But like if you understand where the torque's going, you understand actually beyond being a sandbag, what is this giving me that just squatting a bar isn't? And it is that ice component, I guess, depending on what part of the lift though too, because that's where it gets a little, is it the clean or the press if you're doing clean and press and those types of things. And then with the sprinting, I would have never known this even 5 years ago, before I started talking like Julien Pineau and things like that. Is you look at like track and field high jumpers, a lot of times we'll think, oh, okay, they're just thin, they're fast twitch, they're wired up. But what's so interesting, and this was ever since my conversation with Julien, is you realize that high jumpers are actually built a lot different than, say, 800-meter runners. I mean, from a structural perspective, like their bone structure is usually pretty similar, their body mass index and those things. But the muscle layout is actually quite a bit different because the 800 runner, and the 800 is different, like you said, than like the 60-meter specialist has a ton of internal torque-based muscles, like more lower quads and VMO muscles, for example. Like I think it's a big one a lot of people would see. But even upstream, there's changes between like 800 and high jump, and like especially like glute development. A high jumper doesn't have as much glute development as even an 800 runner. But once you get going, once you get to mile, 5K, some of it, just like you said, it gets more external torque, which just for again, this conversation there's a lot of complexity. I'll try to keep it like, I know that in the fire chain, the glutes are in the ice chain or the internal torque chain, and the fire chain is more like lateral quads and those kind of things.
Glute med.
Yeah. You get that glute med. So that's when people talk about the glutes. It's that glute med.
Yeah.
That's a big difference for that ET.
Monster band walk.
Yeah.
That's like, is that all the way dialed to fire? Is there any like other than the monster band? I didn't see monster band walks in the shadow template somehow. You guys must have.
No, but I mean, people feel glutes on that, right? But I think it's primarily glute med is what you're contracting.
You're experiencing.
There.
Yeah. That is the thing too, even just running for a second, because I just find it interesting. It's almost like, what does it take for someone who's built like more like a distance runner naturally to get faster at short distances? And part of it is just those internal torque muscles, because that goes with the territory of accelerating well. It's and I guess on one level, it's like you could do a deep squat, but there's better ways to even dig into that than I mean, I think a deep squat's fine, but you could get people deep squatting, shoving their knees out the whole time, and they might not be getting accessing that chain as well as they could.
Sure. Yeah. 100%. Especially if they're like, that's what I was saying too, is like when somebody is already reliant on one of them, like you have like somebody that does practice a behavior very heavily. I've noticed when you go to introduce them on it, like to a concept, usually there's an exercise you can get them to like drive through the torque line you want to, but they might be trying to be reliant on what they're already dominant in. So yeah, there's definitely like key exercises I use now to introduce people to the lines to like get associated to them, whether I'm talking to them about it or not. I feel like there's like crushing, like squatting with a sandbag in front of you would make you I would say almost always going to feel IT. So for ice.
Yeah. Something that's a little more general, maybe just to put something more applied onto this, just to kind of hammer this part home, because I think if fire and ice or internal and external torques are not understood, then you jump to smoke. It's like me sitting there in calculus class in high school where I was just thinking about basketball practice when the first line of the equation went on the board, and then I check in 3 lines later and I was totally So I feel like it is kind of something that compounds itself as you go, which is awesome because in some ways I've thought about this. Like, I mean, just basic weightlifting, which certainly is effective, but there's not necessarily like, I feel like if you're getting an education in something how you guys have classified it allows a lot more understanding of the thing, the same way learning music does. And I think it's a really beautiful thing. I was just maybe as an example, like let's say you have someone who's like a distance runner who comes in to train with you. They're like, I like running 5Ks or I like running the mile or whatever it is. And they are more of a external torque dominant chain type. What's your approach with training their strengths with the exercises you select, like things that reinforce that chain versus things that are more of that internal torque, like the ice? And I like that it's called fire and ice because I like thinking of it. It's like, sympathetic fight, like something that's explosive. It's something that almost like cools it down for balance. That's kind of how I think about it sometimes.
Sure.
Yeah. So I'm curious how you guys got that, but I'd be curious, like just someone like that who they do a skill, the skill demands that type of torque chain. How do I reinforce that and how do I balance it out?
You want to go first, DJ?
Oh, well, real quick, the fire and ice, how I think about it is, so with the internal torque, the ice, I'm thinking like ice is condensing, right? Like even when you shiver, you kind of come inside, right? And then fire, you're like, oh, you touch something hot, you react and you open up and get away. And it's this more combustion outward energy. And that's how I kind of sense intuitively, like you're cold. And then it's like, oh, you touch something hot. And that kind of gives people, okay, like you reflexively, 2 different directional tensions are enacted and your body moves toward that. And like you said, it's you're thinking of the nervous system. That's kind of what we evolved to do. These kind of basic strategies are there.
Yeah. Even I love it because it's like sensory. It's like something you feel. It's not just like an idea. It's like an embodied feeling. Like if I was doing plyometrics and it was like pretend the ground is fire, I would probably in my head these little quick contact hops where I wasn't bending my knees much. That's the chain I'm going to be using more, But then I suppose if you said pretend the ground is ice and you're like, you're shivering into it, I'm sure I'd activate more of that internal torque chain. Not that would be. I've never heard that as a plyometric cue, but just for the sake of thinking about what would activate. It's interesting.
You might have to have more ground contact time, so it might make you ice.
It would, yeah.
yeah. It's slipping all over the place.
Get a branding iron and just poke them. They'll get up there.
Oh man, what were we saying though? What was you were asking? So something like
runner. Like
so we were talking about running or like so like a strategy. What I might do with somebody when they come in, and you use the example of a runner. So like if I have a long distance runner and their strength is probably ET, as long as the person is feeling well, I would say the typical thought process is I'm gonna ride their strength a lot, especially through my movement of stuff. So like I'm gonna be doing exercises in ET, a lot of movement in it would be my thought. And then what I usually do with the introduction of the other side is I do a lot of like isometrics in it. So I do a lot of holds in a lot of different ways with somebody so that they're not losing connection and understanding of it. Or they're gaining an understanding of it at the same time. So positions, so doing positional work and learning to feel something else. And then I might, after I feel like they have a handle on using both of them or riding the one they're good at, and just feeling the other, I might explore some strategies of movement with it, just see if there's opportunity there for some sort of performance increase or opening something up there. But that would be like the general rule of thumb I would go in with somebody. I work with a lot of fighters right now, and they're very IT heavy athletes. And for the most part, I'm just giving them ET as isometrics and holds just so they have it and they utilize it for specific things, tasks or drills that they do. But most of it's, as long as they're healthy, because they're contact athletes, they're hurt for very obvious reasons. So I usually give them that as like a breath of fresh air, feeling good and being in tune with their body. And then I open those up for specific strategies when we're prepping maybe for a fight or something like that.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And in some ways, it's almost like, and I suppose this isn't straight like ice or IT, but a distance runner just doing an isometric lunge hold. It is like, it's a lot deeper knee to bend than they typically be in. And there is a lot more internal torque there than where they would typically be exposed to. But you're not like loading it up and saying, hey, I want you to split squat, a really heavy weight with a lot of reps, which could maybe throw off their balance to some level if you took it too far, versus just, here's an ISO, feel it, you be with it to balance you out. But that's all we need because you want to perform in the main thing.
Yeah, I'm not like trying to go through the movement pattern and reshape the fascia and get everything like thinking that this is a new process that we do. You're good and need to be good at what you do, but I want you to feel this and know that it's there, and you're probably going to need it at some point after your fucking long distance career or something like that for the balance of your life. Yeah. So that's the thought process I put around it.
Yeah. What are some of the, like you said, the fighters are IT dominant. What are some of the ISOs for external torque that you really like using? And if there's any internal torque ISOs you really like too, I'd be interested to hear those.
Dude, the biggest one I do, honestly, the number one, most people I feel like are like, most people I work with are probably IT. So I'm usually trying to get somebody to hold ET. And I do this drill we call like the Bozu flat, or not, ski jumper or roof raiser. And it's sort of like this back extension that you extend yourself up over a Bozu ball. And I just hold that position. And sometimes I'll have them do this little arm raise, this little roof raiser action, just to test to see if they can maintain the ET feeling. But that one is just so not associated to any other fucking pattern they do. And it's such a great way to feel it. It's akin to like grabbing a big ball and hugging it, which would make you feel IT in its own way. And I just think it's the perfect thing for it. I don't know if you have any specific ISOs.
That's
kind
of like a Cobra, by the way, too. Quickly. That's like a visual. It's like being a Cobra over the Bosu ball, basically.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, DJ,
I mean, I use a torque stick a lot to connect people to the ice, the IT. So I'll just have them squeeze that while they're doing different movements, and that kind of just biases the torque they're going to use, the tension. But mainly I'm just putting constraints on the exercises they're already doing to kind of get them to do what I'm trying to get out of the exercise. And I'm mostly doing if a gen pop person comes in, I'm doing like 100% IT.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, like specialist fighter gen pop. So that's their jam. Like a gen pop needs that IT.
And even someone who's doing let's say weightlifter or someone who does ET, it's still I don't know, maybe 80-20. Just it might be like a 50-50 split on their program, but the volume is always higher on IT and it's always heavier, less reps on ET as far as like classic exercises go.
So like a high handle hex bar deadlift or even higher, that would be like a low rep situation, like where it's more, like an Anderson squat or a rack half squat versus something that's deeper. You want to give them more repetitions there.
Right. More bodybuilding focus on the IT, more like either Olympic weightlifting or some partial compound lifts for the ET.
Today's podcast is sponsored by Lila Exogen Wearable Resistance. Exogen is used by coaches such as Randy Huntington and Chris Corfist and is an incredible tool in overloading the angular momentum and speed aspect of human movement. You can get 25% off of Exogen sleeves by heading to lilateam.com and using the code JustFly25. Yeah, that's kind of where I just love that there's like the fire tag to it, because it's just funny where my mind perceives that. But I also think of like, it was like Charles Poliquin wrote that article a while ago on the 5 elements. Like he tried to, classify individuals like Chinese medicine, and the fire type was like the power lifter who didn't do well over 5 reps or something. Like it's almost like it's fiery. It's like low rep. Like it's just interesting to have those tags because it starts to, I think just stuff's just stickier. It tells a story in a way versus like, all right, you do this reps. It's, I just think that is really interesting to consider. And I would agree with you. It makes perfect sense to me.
I think he was onto something with that. I mean, the personality type you see with like short distance sprinters, we know they're, they have these pecs, VMOs, like we see the muscular difference. But you see these similarities in personality as well. And I think it's so of course you're going to be maybe drawn to a certain sport that you fit in with. But also I think the activity changes you on a personality level. I have a friend, Joel Mullen. He went from like a movement, like Ido Portal practice. And then he went to powerlifting, and then he went to Olympic weightlifting, and he changed like his political views by going into different and he changed his personality, like his emotional disposition. And we like to talk about that. I don't know, it could be the culture you're surrounding yourself with, but I think I feel differently after doing something explosive or plyometric. I think Christian Thibodeau, did I pronounce his name right?
Yeah.
He's talking about the neurotypes, right? Who prefer different types of training and have to be programmed differently. Yeah, but I think it works both ways. You are changing your neurochemistry by the activities to some degree.
Yeah, I agree. I kind of wonder what would happen with my own belief system if I spent like a lot of time, if I stopped sprinting or doing like, explosive lifts and spent a lot of time in like the somatic stuff, like the somatic world. I find there's a lot, it's just so interesting how there is like a movement style does fit with kind of a little bit of a worldview that's associated and how you generally makes you feel.
Like David embodies fire to me, right?
He did when you met him.
Oh, he's cooled down a bit.
Oh yeah,
Nice.
oh yeah. He does that jujitsu now, so he's an ice athlete. Yeah. When I met that man, that guy was sticking his ass out, had this big old fucking glute med, man, and like that guy was talking fucking coils about ET all day to me, and the guy just flipped 100% to the other side, picking up stones, grappling people, more ground contact time than I've ever seen him have.
Yeah,
that's
catching shit. Yeah, it's interesting though. Yeah, and the personality changed from it quite a bit, to be honest.
Wow.
So yeah, kind of interesting. So yeah.
Yeah. The like the ice type body or the fire type body is kind of more, or maybe the ice type is the most distinguished. It's, I guess, like more pecs, more glutes, obliques, like lower quads, right? And then I guess I don't even know like a fire type. The only thing I can think of is sometimes I see like a high jumper who's really elite, and you see like kind of delts, and everything else is kind of skinny. I don't know. It's an interesting.
I feel like in the bodybuilding world, we were looking at this at one point, DJ, and like there's somebody that would probably try to do both sides a lot to change the tissue lines. And then at some point, you'll see like two different really high level people that have very distinct different looks. And you'll like one will be a little more like barrel chest and open and like big ass traps and stuff, whereas the other might not have that. But like I feel like at some point somebody might lean into one side of it at like a high level in bodybuilding where you can really see all the fucking tissue. And I feel like they end up having like a whole different strategy on stage or something like that. But I feel like I've at one point at least was looking through like different people like that. But
I
like
think it
something
was Arnold IT pretty
yeah.
fits that. And then I think it was Julian who pointed this out. Dorian Yates,
Yeah.
more ET. And their training is completely different. Like Dorian Yates, like lower reps, higher intensity. And yeah, Arnold just going for the pump.
Yeah, their personalities were so different too. Like Arnold's so much more like extroverted, and Dorian, so much more the shadow. I was wondering, is that where the shadow template came from? Personalities that were so much different that went with that too. It's really I would have never noticed if it wasn't for them. Yeah, pointing out those bodybuilder types either.
Arnold laid back, chilling, right? Not a care. And then do you guys notice that with like fast, short distance sprinters, kind of chilling, kind of laid back, and then, a little bit of carefree.
I would say for the most part. Yeah, and the fighters I work with are usually pretty fucking move around, chill, and then they fucking pick up and go, So
yeah, distance runners definitely more stressed out. Like distance and endurance athletes tend to be more high stress or high anxiety too.
Anxiety, yeah.
It's almost interesting to think about if, like we were talking about training the weakness, like, okay, you're an external torque, you're a distance runner. In some level, training that, air quotes, like muscular imbalance, maybe it's for mental, too. Like you mentioned, Chris, like, well, it's also like giving you something for life, but it's also like, well, here's the elixir or the balance. And part of this is for your body, but it's also something that hopefully your mind enjoys,
Yeah. And I'm looking for wellness at that point with somebody. So somebody might be physically well, but if I can like tell somebody's having like a fucking down day or like they're just not, they just got like, for me, it would be like they just got done sparring or something like that and they're not feeling fucking great. Like I don't need to just keep riding what they're doing. So opening up that other side, my kind of rule with all the people I work with here at the lab, it's like they got to leave with like a big ass smile on their face, no matter how hard we work or whatever. And like, it's because we're just sort of, I usually feel like it's just like this delicate balance between those lines with them. And if I feel like I've found that, then the person usually just fucking spark on their face when they go and they're ready to go do whatever they got to do next, which is awesome, which is what we all want, basically, I would imagine. So,
yeah, it's kind of like thinking about like potentiation too. It's like on one level, if ice cools down a person who just does a repetitive endurance event, and I guess life isn't even meant to be like that. We're meant to maybe run, but then, I don't know, carry some stuff or pick up some stuff. That's more that internal chain and balance ourselves out a little bit just physically in the body. But thinking about if it's the other way, if it's someone who's super cool and you want to stimulate them and potentiate them, doing something like a partial rep squat or something, or that's a little bit more, like that's more stimulating. It's like you do that, you would do it before you do a fast sprint or a high jump or maybe a competition or something like that. But it's interesting to think, well, if you did a 1 rep max deep squat, would you get the top half might be more, that fire stimulating. The bottom half is more ice. I don't know. It's just interesting to think about it that way. I always feel like just those partial pushes are so stimulating from that nervous system perspective. I'm sure mentally you see people after like, it's just a different, it's a different state of mind.
For sure.
Especially powerlifting squat, right? Where you're just going past parallel. You see people do the nose torque, slapping each other in the face. And then, you see other lifts in there, closing their eyes, taking a breath. So, you see two different strategies for sure. It's states of mind.
Yeah. I asked you guys about the examples of an ISO for external torque, like kind of the Cobra thing, and then internal torque. DJ, you mentioned the torque stick. I was going to ask, maybe that's just to back to a little bit of muscle balance. And DJ, you mentioned, I guess like Gen Pop, if you just hit him with internal torque. I mean, the average Gen Pop is probably very worked, stress, very high stress. So I'm sure there's that part. But I always felt like too, Like every time I just did too much of a typical lift, like if I did too much bar bench press, and it didn't even matter if I'm doing rows too, like my shoulder would get pretty torqued up, like in a bad way. Like especially my right shoulder would get pretty messed up. But as soon as I'm doing like a lot of torque stick, sandbag, it's totally fine. So I imagine like a good deal of that is out just muscle balance from like sitting or repetitive tasks or whatever, mental. Like what's the thought process behind some of that with the general population?
I personally just see the IT, internal torque, as the base. Like even creating ET is kind of off of IT. If we look at the arch, and and yeah, like even if you're going to coil, you have to like create tension IT, and then you're wrapping that. Like you can't just do it from a relaxed position and then squeeze. You have to almost pull and ratchet it onto with the like a jump or anything else. There's a wind up, right? And then a let go. So I think that base is good to have. Also, I mean, to link it to like other models like PRI or expansion compression, like that, I see the IT as that exhaled state, right? And ET is more the like inhaled state if you link it to respiration. So I think most people could always use more of that foundation, like even if the goal is ET. So that's my kind of that's how I think about it.
I would say when I'm looking at the Gen Pop right now, when I see somebody, I feel like I'm looking at somebody that's stuck in IT, that has no connection to it, and they're just functioning in it. So the thought process for me would be to regain some actual level of like connection and understanding of IT, which would be through the exercise. It's learning to like use it. But ultimately my goal would be to get them to ET from that. And I feel like what I see in the overall general population fitness community right now is people queuing IT a lot. And I think that that's a wonderful thing. And I think that there's a lot of early success with doing that because you get somebody connected. But I know in my own personal movement practice, having gone through that for so many years, at some point I lost that feeling of ET in myself. And that's what I regained when I came and met Dave, was I felt ET and I felt it split and I felt it in that coil, and it fucking unlocked stuff in me that made me feel like I could run distance again. And I could, because like when I had first met Dave back then, I was sprinting a ton and I was pretty fucking fast. And I was very much looking IT in my tissue lines, and I didn't feel great when I was doing it.
Yeah.
And I used to run distance. Like I used to run 5-8 miles every other day and fucking loved it and had a totally different build. And I couldn't do that anymore. It just didn't feel right anymore. And when I sort of tapped into that ET again, it was sort of that medicine, that positional stuff that I needed to start feeling like I could do that effortless again. So for me, Gen Pop, it's recognizing their IT, but they're disconnected, build up IT, get strong and connected to it, be introducing ET via ISOs during that process so they're not getting access to it. And then it's finding movement expression in ET, which most people, I would say, don't have day-to-day tasks that they need to probably express themselves heavily ET. They're not making the they will be able to probably follow a transition IT that they don't have to express to the other one. But if they want that athleticism, that youthfulness, that ability to transition between the two lines, I think is like fucking necessary.
Yeah.
And the gym, if that's the 45 to 60 minutes a day that somebody's allotting themselves to have a movement practice and an intentional sort of thought process behind it, I think it's like that's the opportunity at some point to get somebody expressing ET again and transitioning through it. And like DJ said, you sort of need both there. So building that foundation of IT and then expanding on that foundation of IT and opening up the expression. And some people, it just turns into some external task that they want to do. They're like, wow, I feel good. I'm going to start running 5Ks, or man, I feel good. I'm going to pick up basketball again. You know what I mean? Like, because I feel good. And I think that's ultimately what you want, is knowing that there's IT and ET, and then that you can adjust the movement expression in the gym and then in the sets and reps. And I think it opens up a lot of avenues outside of the gym, and people can start living life again, and athletes can start performing better and all of that. So
You mentioned a cue. Let's keep this real quick, but a cue for IT. I feel like a lot of the cues I hear in the typical or traditional strength and conditioning is all external, like, like elbows back, chest out, knees out. Everything's always out. I'm just curious what the common cues that you've heard for internal torque tend to be, or if you guys want to cover that at all. But just curious.
Well, you've been mentioning the out on the squat, all today, but like I feel like if you like pop on Instagram right now, you see a lot of people arguing for the knees diving in during the squat.
Yeah.
Which I consider a IT, that whole
same.
process there, and the way the pelvis moves and stuff like that, why that's happening. Like, that's somebody utilizing IT to come out of the bottom squat, right? And not the external, like, powerlifting box squat just below parallel where they might drive out. Or again, maybe both strategies are great and they're just strategies, and like somebody might be able to utilize one versus the other. So, cue wise, like, I think when people are telling somebody to grab the big toe, I think that's a big thing to get into IT for me with somebody. It's hugging something, squeezing something in the front.
Yeah.
Those are probably the big ones for me. Yep.
Yeah. Super quickly, I find it interesting with just acceleration, like even just in running, to feel the torques and acceleration. Like if you said like hugging something in front, like if I'm carrying something and running, like if I'm just like running uphill with a sandbag or sprinting with a medicine ball, I feel like exhalation, like DJ said. Like I don't even think about it. My body is just like exhaling harder as I'm running, and I'm a very naturally external torque person. Like I was a high jumper. I did some level of like longer running when I was younger, better at like the 400 than the 60. But it's like it was cool because I'm like, this must be what it feels like to be someone who is innately, more wired up to be a 60-meter dash specialist. And then versus upright running, like if I'm running upright and I take a big, like I fill my lungs with air as much as I can, it feels like easy, like I'm bouncing. And I'm like, this is what somebody running the 400, like, when coaches are yelling at their 400 to breathe. And I'm like, why are you yelling that at them? But like, maybe this is why, just that having that expansiveness of the lungs and that bounciness of the torque. So I just find it interesting that just the different places you can see that.
To second what Chris was saying, like, yeah, I see a lot of people biasing the IT in the functional crowds, like the blocks and the balls between the legs.
Yeah.
Squeezing. I think maybe the beneficial thing, like you said, when you're holding the torque stick and when you're squeezing, your shoulder feels better. What I've noticed is a lot of people are kind of collapsed in their torque to one side. So they're good at like turning this way and creating internal torque, and then they're like eccentrically winding up an external torque on one side. And it doesn't matter if you give them ETQ, ITQ, out or in. It's that both sides are now kind of stopping the turn to one side, to collapse to one side. That's beneficial. And I think that's why it's good. ET, IT, you're just reestablishing each side so that they have that kind of option. And, Chris goes in the gate and all that. But I think that's kind of a big money part. And yeah, I think you could do it either way, right? It's just the way people bias kind of turning to one side becomes an issue repetitively when they lose the capacity to go the other way.
Yeah. And that's where I did want to get into, I guess, like the split, like split fire, split ice, or like that's where it just turns into coiling, I'd imagine, where it's one side.
Yeah. Typically for coiling for me, that means there's a side bend. That would be like the definition of it. And you can be coiled both ET and IT, but it also opens up the opportunity to be mixing the two. So like pursuing one of them, but you could be coiled and expanding from that as well. And that's where you'll start seeing, like, when you get into that one, that's where we can say, like, that's why somebody throws the ball this way versus that way or this way. Like, there's all these little, like, nuanced things that a coach might be like, this is how we do it. And another one does, this is how we do it. And they both fucking work. And it's just a different expression through those lines is what I've seen from it thus far. And that gives me room to like, as a strength coach, I can be like, oh, like I'm gonna express this one because that's what your coach is telling you to do, and we're gonna like encourage that behavior in here. So I'm not mixing it up, basically. And without that center, like that bilateral DJ's talking about, like there's just no reason to even overthink those ones. Like go in and associate to the lines, get familiar with fire, get familiar with ice, and then explore them, transitioning between them. And then like when you get into the split stuff, like I sort of, for most people, I usually just sort of set things up how I think they will probably encourage the line to go. But I don't even try to add any of the like intellectual, like think about it, cueing or any of that at that point. I'm letting them just move at that point because this stuff doesn't always have to even be. I remember early on when we were talking about this DJ, I feel like everybody felt like everything had to be really like tense, like really engaged all the time. And you're allowed to just move through it freely as well. Like it doesn't have to be super tense and engaged all the time. That's a great portion of understanding how to feel it and understand it. And I think the isometrics are really helpful for that. That's like where I would really put a lot of like the thought and cueing in as I do it in the ISOs for somebody to feel where they're driving it from. And then I like open up just easy movement and expression without any thought that tends to let them move through those lines.
The rope is good for that.
Yeah, that's what's a really fun thing about that. For like anybody that has listened to me on here or Dave on here before, like, and you've thought about that rope, it generally, if you're underhand swinging a tool, it's ET. If you're overhand, it tends to be IT. Sort of like this gather in and express out thought process. It's a great way just to get after it.
Yeah. Do you guys think, people have been joking a little bit on social media about like fascia is the hot thing right now. It's like, there's always the buzzwords or things. And I think there's obviously important pieces of the fascia that are worth getting into. But I also I thought about this, like almost that if we're talking about a more muscular driven athlete, it's generally more IT stuff, like pecs and glutes and obliques and lower quads. And sometimes I wonder with the external torque chain, running up like the lateral sides of the body. And I'll post in the show notes. I'll make sure I post. Someone somewhere put Julian's little, like the yellow and the red, like on the little guy, like here's the chains and the muscles. And I always try to reference that. You guys had the fire and the ice piece in the course. But I feel like a lot of that lateral chain, like the IT band, all the fibrous and connective tissue on that outer side of the body, I feel like a lot of that is more connective than it is like muscle. I'd be curious your take on that side of it all as well.
That's the sense I get of it. Yeah. I don't know DJ's total thoughts on that anymore, but I definitely have that sense of like it's partial range of stuff. It feels really connective. That like DJ, you were mentioning that like needing IT to like draw yourself into the ET. So this is where like me and Dave play around with that idea of being, we've always used the term like just a bag of fucking bones and just connective tissue. And like, if I just like completely soften myself and just give in to my bones and that connective tissue, I feel like I can light up ET itself without having to draw myself there. Just wielding that gravity on my fucking structure, which is designed to fight gravity in a sense. And I feel like I can sort of like capture that a little bit. And it tends to be the harder one, I feel, to people. I find for people to move through athletically, like to dance around or let me put it this way, to do gym stuff. Let me say that, like the traditional exercise, I think most of the cueing is so driven to IT personally that like people just tend to chase like a range of motion and a depth and that tissue feel that you're looking for typically when you're exercising. And like when I try to convert exercises to the ET feel, there's this sense of like minimal range of motion that I think a lot of people have a hard time accepting in exercise for like volume and repetition if they were to choose it for something voluminous and not just huge expression of weight or something like that. And I guess that's my take on it. I don't know. It does feel very like connective tissue. That's like what I would associate it to. It's just this like easy, it's recoily. Yes.
I feel like it's
fascia is a hype word.
Yeah, it is. I feel like it's almost like with the fire, I think almost like bounce or dance. Like if you're just bouncing up and down to music, and the thing that makes that expansive and easy. And it's something, it's almost like a different, I think a lot of times we want things like 1, 2, 3, let me define this for you intellectually, but it's like that you feel that bouncy, like your body stacking itself up, or even the way a good distance runner feels that in the stride, which you can't just do it. You have to it takes a lot of reps and body awareness and working it, versus it seems like the ice is it is maybe more of a squeezing feel. It's like like a torque stick or a sandbag. And yeah, it's interesting to think about those, like not only the differences if you did bunch of them with how it affects your mind, but also almost the mindset that might go with one or the other a little bit, and how to access that. I'd be curious if you guys have any thoughts on that one.
A mindset, how to access each one.
Yeah, like is there a mindset for accessing more bounce, like external torque, like kind of that connective system versus like an internal torque, something that's more squeezing oriented? Is it a different kind of state of mind in teaching that, do you feel like?
I kind of automatically get a little more aggressive if I'm doing ET. And I'm thinking like in the weight room, like a sumo pull or third pull, like my jaw's open, right? I'm like, I'm not thinking too much. I'm in the moment. I'm sending. Like to me, ET is like send, like kinetically, like shoot it off, let it go. In IT, I'm like, a lot of times I'll be, more rhythmic when I'm doing IT, staying in the pump, in the flow, and I'm like, ooh, I'm popping on ET.
I'll say something on it. I'm gonna go for running for me. Like when I'm making transitions between the two styles, so I will purposely do like fartlek style running, where I change of pace, change of distance, like just random shit. And I'll do a concept where I'll feel like I'm driving the movement from ET, and then I'll drive the movement from to IT. And a very specific example of this. So this wasn't me like just going out for a run. This was like I was out doing something on some football field. We were working with a bunch of athletes or something like that. My wife and my son came, and my son was running around with my wife's keys, and he dropped the keys in the field, and we didn't know. And we were leaving, and we're like, oh crap. And it's like starting to get dark. And my ass is like, all right, I got to scan this field by myself to find a key. So I'm accelerating to the field because the sun is going down, and like I'm in that run. Like I can't leave myself. I feel like I'm very much in my own experience when I'm accelerating in IT. And then when I get to the field, I sort of switch to this like taller posture, like I'm scanning, and I'm very external. I'm outside of myself, and I'm bopping around, and I'm literally running the entire field, which is a ton of distance to look for this thing. But I'm so focused on the other thing and doing it quickly. Like there was something about being an ET when I was moving there that like I was outside of myself. Like I could focus, like somebody going for a jog, you can sit there and talk to your friend and bop around and enjoy it. Whereas like when I'm on the other side, like it's work, and I can't get outside of this muscular experience I'm having, and this like driving and accelerating. And that was like an example of like me bopping around and exploring the ET mostly. But I'll go on these runs where I'll purposely, like I'll tell myself I got to get someplace. So it kind of gives me that external drive that I got to like accelerate, and I'll go there. But like I can't even think about the place. Like I'm just accelerating, and then I get there, and then I can kind of stop and think again and ride that ET line. But I don't know. I don't know if that explained anything.
Yeah. No, I actually I think
it's
the
a
picture,
story of nothing else.
The picture that's kind of coming along for me is also there is that like, working in ET running, I think is different than working ET like with a heavy load. And it maybe that's where it could go into those propulsion arcs where it's like, you have the 3 zones, and like you have the expansive zone, which is like the bottom in ice, like the bottom of a deep squat, and the knees are coming in a little bit, and like that's maybe more that is when you start to compress. So I'm like mixing things up, but it's almost maybe like going for the pump in IT is kind of expansive. You got blood flowing. Running in ET where you're all the way kind of more elongated, also kind of it's more expansive, but like that compressive zone in the middle where things compress is more that sympathetic place. And like you mentioned, Chris, like that when you're accelerating, you're a little bit more in that more sympathetic place. And that's where I think with athletics, I think that's where you can see an athlete in the gym. Like I was watching a video of Luka Doncic working out, like just because I did the seminar with Austin Yoakum. We were just kind of talking about a lot about athletes in the weight room, and some people like that who just would rather play, like him and Kyrie Irving. They'd probably rather go play. But I'm watching Luka in the weight room. Obviously incredible. Like if you talk about being open, court vision, those kind of things, like phenomenal. And it's just funny when he was asked to do the hex bar deadlift, you could tell he's just not excited about it. And I feel like those athletes like him actually don't want to go sympathetic in that. It's almost like they have this thing that won't let them get too sympathetically driven. But then like when he's doing the slide board, there's like music and he's like dancing. He's trying to like kind of, and he gets into that. It's just interesting. I feel like a defining feature of good athletes is this, they always kind of stay open, or even people like make fun of LeBron, like he's doing like the balancy stuff when he works out. But I think he tries to stay open too, if that makes sense. Versus it's almost like those athletes, and they're obviously like LeBron's physically gifted enough that it doesn't matter that much, but it's almost like there's like an expansiveness to that. But I think I don't know if I'm going off the rails. I was just kind of going with what you were saying, Chris, about like when you're kind of at the top of the stride, bouncing around, being open versus compressing down.
See, like when I see somebody doing stuff like that, like at a high level, everybody was always like, oh, they're just so athletic. Like, I think they're intuitive with themselves.
Yeah.
And they know what they want to feel. So if you give them a fucking environment that they got to do something, like they're going to look for what they want to feel. Yeah. He's probably not riding on coach's cues in that fucking place. No. I know that within myself. Like I do a lot of dumb stuff. You know what I mean? And sometimes I'm not like actively trying to think about what I'm doing. Like I'll just experience it and be intuitive and almost even forget everything I know because I don't know everything. And just trust in what your body is going to do there is okay as well. So I don't know if that made any sense either.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Getting into the complexities of athletics and human movement I don't think it is a necessarily cut and dry black and white conversation. There's a lot of different perspectives that paint the picture. Yeah.
I have noticed a lot of high level people just not caring about the gym too much. Mm-hmm. And the ones that start caring about the gym too much, I feel like aren't high level anymore. Yeah. So like, because they start trying to be intellectual or trusting the coaches in the gym too much there, or, like everybody, like, I train here, like we're not that serious about the gym. And that's like my job. Like I love the gym, you know what I mean? But like, we also don't take it that serious. Like we have a good time with it. And we explore different patterns and we let them be intuitive. And I don't always like, even if I have hold a constraint for the day or I have a thought process constraint, I'm not constrained to it either. Because if they're like, that's just coaching, I guess, like just being intuitive to what that person's needs are in the moment. But I try to instill that in somebody else too, is recognizing that like the little choreography that I usually might put up for you doesn't mean anything unless it means something and you can sense it and work with it. And it's great if we can follow the constraint. Maybe we'll get some sort of performance benefit from it, but like it doesn't ultimately matter if it doesn't matter. And I feel like that hex bar deadlift, it didn't fucking matter to that guy. He probably wasn't feeling like it's doing anything for him right then, but somebody might think it's doing something for him. And I do think that can do something for somebody, but you also have to have a belief structure in it a little bit and have that external vision from it. But if that person's not feeling it, then they're not feeling it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think constraint it's important because it's like when you see people who go the functional route and then it's like, oh, this bad, this good, they usually become detrained in some sense while they think they're becoming more functional or they're doing better on their assessment and whatever system they're in. But overall, it's almost like they're becoming deconditioned and detrained and they're not better off, but intellectually they're more correct. And yeah, that's not a good game to get in trying to win that, because then you're no longer in your body, really.
Today's podcast is sponsored by my favorite jump testing and training device, the plyomat. If you want a jump mat that can not only get standard counter movement jumps and reactive jumps, but also is something you can put into your standard plyometric training, such as hurdle hops and bounds, to gather not only height, but reactive strength, contact time, and add that extra dynamic to your total training session, then check out the plyomat, and you can head to plyomat.net. That's plyomat.net to learn more. Today's podcast is sponsored by Team Builder. You can get a free trial of their training portal software by heading to teambuilder.com, and you can use the code JUSTFLY for a 30-day free trial. Sign up today with TeamBuilder and see what they can do for you for your training programs and your team. I think that's a cool way of, I think Stephen Jones, who's a cricket fast bowling coach, has said something, I don't know if it's his exact words, but it's kind of like the death of the natural athlete, in the sense that, and there's still obviously great athletes, but like a Pele or a Bo Jackson, or like, it's just like someone who came up before. We have a million ways to classify how you move, and a million ways to assess you, and data points and profiling. And it's like, on some level, I do think there's a good side to that. But at the same time, as soon as you like, it is almost like you guys said, or one of you was saying, like, as soon as you start to live too much in each of those points assigned to you, you aren't fully you anymore. That dog is gone. That dog in you, if that makes sense. It's almost, Paul Cater had an interesting perspective working with baseball. He said the minor league guys, and this being to your point, Chris, is like, he said the minor league guys, they tried a lot harder in the weight room than the major league guys, because that's the thing they were trying to do to kind of make it. It's like, what can I do to make it? What can I do to make it?
Yeah.
But that's not the direction that you have to go to make it. It can help you if you do it correctly. It can work from that total perspective. But if you're just funneling in and just pressing harder with compression, that's not the difference maker.
Yeah. Yeah, it's unfortunate. It's like a physical practice. Somebody can take ownership themselves, though. So that might be a mental dedication. There could be something, like I said, something there that will get them there. But that's where our mission is trying, at least like at Weck here, is we're trying to turn a lot of that movement you do in there, and using like G-torque and these torque chains, like, to actually like make that person's work ethic in the gym there have more carryover to that potential to be in the fucking big league. You know what I mean? So that they're practicing the pathways that could potentially make them throw faster, or hit harder, or be more balanced, or whatever. Right?
Yeah. With the G-torque too, I do want to get into a few of those defining pieces of that course that I thought really much of the course. That's one of the things that I really appreciated about it, is a lot of things. Let's just say it was so unique. Like, there's things I know I'd seen pieces from Julien and David, but I'm like, I have not seen this anywhere. And I just love studying it and studying the shadow template. And ever since I've been using like ideas of that, like my clients who have had back pain issues in the past, like, so good. And just the way I think about muscle balance and things like that. And so I just want to, with the time we have left, I just wanted to ask you a few questions about that quickly. Well, I guess one was, where did the idea come from for you guys working together? Like, what was the impetus to get together and we're going to do this, and here's the torques, and here, let's make the program. Like, I mean, how did each of you guys' minds interplay into what that became?
I mean, I think the big thing, like we were saying at the beginning, was like, we just both were mentoring under these two guys. We felt like there was something that needed to be converged there. We started talking just individually, and then it was like, let's do this language and make sure other people can understand it. And it's a fun language, like you said, and it's distilled down to fucking emojis, which is awesome. What a like simple, fun way to just explore like the complexity of movement. And I think that was a big piece of it. DJ, yeah.
Yeah, I just remember we were creating the course kind of for us, and then
it was for us. Is what I remember.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we actually created the whole course, and then we were like, we need to redo this, because we were in so much of an exploratory thing ourselves, and learning it and understanding it, and how we wanted to understand it. And I feel like we like sort of redid something, and like ended up.
It was interesting because we started out with kind of the framework of a model, and we were trying to fill it in by just exploring movement. And usually it's the other way around, right? Mm-hmm. So we were like, like, how deep does this go? Where can it go? And we didn't even, I think it was at the end, we were like, so how do we show this?
What do we made this? What do we do?
Yeah. One of the pieces that I just like watching, my mind was so blown, like, just going through all like the little power circles, like the thing with, the chi ball, and all the ways to explore like internal torque on one side, external torque on the other. And I still the funny thing, I use the exact name. Like I've been putting this in programs. It's like crouching fire hidden ice is one of them. It's like a it's like basically like a sissy squat. You're down in a crouch and then you do a sissy squat, and I was like, oh, this is a lot of fun. But maybe just to help like explanation so people could understand that layer of it, just because I think it is really interesting, and I think it's something that anyone could do. Like a regular isometric lunge, you're just standing there, or you're in a lunge, you're vertical torso, hands at your sides. You're not bending either way or the other. Tell me like if you're coiling and doing it, like how does that fit with how you explore the chi torque or the torque? Like how would you take an iso lunge and explore torques with that? Is an example is what I'm asking.
For the power circles.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that for me, that's every exercise I'm kind of power circling in a sense to set up and lift the weight. But yeah, it's kind of like set up in a position and then create internal torque there, create external torque there. And you'll see a lot of positions, external torque especially, I think mobility wise is very limited. People have very limited external torque mobility. So whenever they're going kind of farther out in their mobility or their joint ranges, it's like internal torque is going to get you there. But if you can expand both ranges of tension in that position, that's kind of the money on the power circles and those positional isometric. It's kind of like a PNF for instead of relaxing, contract, relax. It's internal, external.
I love that you mentioned the PNF because that's one of those things, like things go in pendulums sometimes. Like I remember learning about PNF stretching 20 years ago when I was in college and going through it. I was like, this is amazing. This feels great. I have more range of motion. And then I went and forgot about it for 15 years. But it's like coming back to it, it's like, why did this ever leave? But if you can do it, in your own body, you don't even need a partner, I think. And with going through relevant positions, I think it's even more powerful. It's not just someone stretching your hamstring or your quad. I'm going through a lunge that relates to gait and getting more mobility and body connection out of it. And I definitely saw a lot of cool stuff there. I guess just long story short is I've taken some of my just iso lunge holding practice, which is great. Like it works. It's cool. But layering that into, okay, well, if my left leg's in front, let me crank onto my left elbow down a little bit. Let me inhale and expand. Let me exhale and then feel the internal chain. I just think there's like the breathing too, and like the old school strongman and how big of a piece the breath was for them. I just don't think we connect those things as much. A lot of times it's like, well, do this range of motion, do this cars maybe. Not that those are bad. I think those can be a good thing, but it's just, I appreciate how you guys connected all that because I found going through those types of motions that if I followed it with my breath, I even got more out of it. And it's like almost beyond that. I think that's something any athlete could be good at and that would give them some value before you would even get into anything that's more compressive.
Yeah, so power circles. So you were mentioning like a split squat, how I might adjust that or exploring that. And there are actually like 4 different strategies I take in that I think I can explain pretty simply. And you sort of touched on one. And if I'm in that split squat, essentially what I would do is over that lead leg, I would create, you mentioned that you could paint a picture by thinking like drawing your elbow to your hip or even drawing your shoulder to that front or that lead leg hip and like pulling in or containing or finding that IT or ice position. And then also with that, like that drawing in, when I go to ET, I know like DJ mentioned earlier, sort of that like, oh shit, something's hot. And you sort of like jump back, kind of like almost like, that kind of response. Like in a gait cycle type thought process like that in a split squat, what I would be thinking is actually more of not a retreat, but more of like a retreat IT or ET. I would think more of like a through, like a pursue. So using the center line of the sternum and trying to get that to be like the spear on the body and get to the point ahead of me. So like in that split squat, I would sort of like contain or get like a deeper range in the IT. And then as I go to the ET, I would sort of like come out of the range a little, open up and actually get closer to the thing in front of me or the target ahead. So that if that paints a picture for anybody listening. And then on top of that, the other strategy I would do in that is actually to do the, like in that split stance, I have a lead leg and I have a trailing leg. So for me, the lead leg would typically be like a locomotive strategy, like get better walking, running, cutting. And then what I do a lot of emphasis and work on right now is going to the backside now. So the trailing leg, I create a side bend on that. And for me, that has a lot more to do with like swinging and throwing of objects would be kind of how I would explain it easily. And I would do the same thought process there, like try to create like a gather, like I'm trying to pull somebody in, like to knee him in the face, and then I would try to draw through like I'm hitting a home run with a baseball bat. That would be like 4 different sort of positions I would probably hold, and then I would work on trying to move between them, similar to DJ. He was mentioning how would he use that sort of as a preparation for a specific lift. So you could do it in any shape, essentially. It's just the idea of moving or experiencing both ends of those torque lines in those shapes.
DJ, something you were saying, Chris, brought me back to something DJ said about trying to get more range out of external torque. Like you said, pushing your chest forward. And it's so funny.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned the waves, like PNF stretching and like, but it's almost like we have given like chest out a bad rap because everything's chest out, butt back with the bar on your back in the weight room. That's like traditional strength and conditioning. And if you do that a lot, that's a very compressive thing, or, you know, extension patterning or whatever, pushing your center mass forward. But without even a load, I think it's intuitive. And, you know, DJ, you mentioned it, and I was just going back. I was thinking of Jay Schrader's system with all the extreme isometrics in the original iteration. Part of position that Jay talked about was like more of a chest out, like long, tall position. It was more of a resting external torque thing with posture. Just because, yeah, if you don't, all things outside of extension patterning, a lot of people are really poor at that, just in their own body weight. And it's just a great chance to work more of that over time. And so
a big thing with that extension patterning too, is I think that like flexion extension sort of thought process, that front back, I think that's part of that patterning. It's torque. It's in and out, or it's like that drawing to the center line, that wrapping around in the back. So it's not just reaching back and compressing stuff. I'm drawing, I'm pulling myself to the center line and pulling through. That term through has been like a huge verbal cue that I use a lot with people now, is getting through something, not lean back, not extend, none of that. That doesn't quite get the feeling I'm usually after when I'm talking ET, but
I like that word. It gets it. It's almost more of an expanding. It's more of an expanding verbiage.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's intuitive. Like in the gym, when you think about just like flexion, extension, it's different than like a wrestler going for a suplex. You know, like that's so much more intuitive. I feel like the feeling of that, because it's wrapping and throwing, and it's swimming more so than just the robotic up and down. And also, you know, talking about the isometrics, this has been around for a long time. This is the old time strongman. Like a lot of their daily practices were isotonic, kind of like dynamic tension practices. I think Charles Atlas, Alexander Zoss, Maxick, Bob Hoffman, that was what they kind of did. And it seemed like an advanced posing practice, because it was high tension, finding muscles, different positions, flexing in and out. And yeah, I think they were onto something. I think there's something about keeping that connection to the body over time. Because these people, especially, the interesting thing is they were competing and doing feats of strength into their old age.
Yeah.
Like up until they died. And yeah, it's different. It's different than a joint circles, you know?
I agree. I think there's something so valuable in having literature or reading like from the past too. Dan John has gotten me into like, what did the track and field throwers do in the 1940s and 50s and 60s? Stuff like that. And they were throwing so far relative to how much they weighed. I mean, Now, if you're going to throw over 70 feet and shot, you usually weigh close to 300 pounds or more, sometimes less. But like back then, people were doing it weighing 265. And it's just interesting to see what they got out of their body. Long story short is I love studying that and the strongman. I think if you were coming up with a curriculum for trainers or strength and conditioning, I think required reading would be doing at least something from those decades, because it stood the test of time. You know, it's funny to think we've gone so far, and how much can we say we can have really improved on some of those guys from that time period with, like you were said, DJ, how well they were doing for so long.
Who knows? Maybe it was the seed oil.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe it was the Wi-Fi.
It probably something to do with that for sure. Yeah, real quick before we get finished here, I did want to, this just one last little practical question. Like I mentioned, like the push pull, I think when we tend to think of muscle balance, it's traditionally like, all right, do a push and do a pull, or maybe going further more, it's like do a push and do a reach or something like that. How do you guys look at, because I look at the shadow templates, like you have some fire, external torque, you have some ice, you have some, it's not like, I think it'd be very easy if you weren't thinking about that stuff to just write a program and everything is external torque, you know, or everything is internal torque. Just tell me a little bit quickly before I get out of here about how do you alternate a program based off of torques in just a single session format, considerations there.
First, DJ?
Yeah, I mean, how I do it is I just rotate A and B. I'll have week 1 internal torque exercise, week 2 external torque version of that exercise. And like I said, one's going to be higher volume, the other one's going to be lower volume. But yeah, I'm doing back and forth, which feels great, you know, because I'm able to hit the same, if you want to call it, pattern, but I'm not getting beat up because I'm using different kind of muscles, and I'm able to push it every week if I go back and forth. So that's how I like to use it personally.
Yeah, I think that's the general rule of it, is the AB for me as well. Sort of that like alternating weeks would probably be the general flow of it. I've explored a couple different things with it. I've done like, if I was like, oh man, I want to really emphasize getting fucking good at squatting or something like that, then and my brain tells me I need to squat more, kind of like I just need to squat often. I need to make it my job in a sense. So having that strategy of AB, being able to perform a so-called squat, but have a different like movement strategy behind it, sort of allows me to become master of a movement. So I can squat Monday, I can squat Tuesday, I can squat Wednesday, I can squat Thursday, I can squat Friday technically. And because I could move between them differently, they don't ever make me feel like I'm being beat up by the squat, because I'm not breaking down the same way. So I think everybody could have their own little intuitive thought on how they do it. The safe way would be like the do A, do B, like switch it off weekly, and it still provides the same thing. But I've sort of like tried to push the edge of that, like how much can I do it? And my thought behind that is like, I worked like as a laborer, so like I had to do work all day, every day, and it was a job. So you have to be able to show up and do it. And some days like you'd be fucking sore from doing something, and you would just sort of pick a different strategy for the day to get the job done differently. So like it'd be the same for walking and running. Like it's like there are daily tasks you have to do, and if I actually had things I had to do, then I would need to do them. And I would rather have a strategy or be able to explore strategy that still allowed me to get the job done or the task done or whatever done. So, and if I don't have any rules and I'm just making the rules up myself and the constraints and the gym is it, then if one of those things matters to me more than another, I love being able to switch between the two just to really hone and try to get really good at a specific task. So I will tend to right now, I do something, I've been calling it this like this, I don't even know what I'm calling it right now, but I basically will take like a specific skill pattern, like something like a push up or a pull up or a basic pattern, like push pull, something of that nature. And I'll try to just explore every avenue on it, and I'll just do it daily. Like I'll just make it my life that I'm going to get really good. It's usually a calisthenic drill that I'll do. So like a push up, a pull up, something simple, and I'll explore it based on that, a different torque line every day. So I feel like I feel like I'm working on the thing that I care about, or I sort of set my mind to, and I'm just hitting a specific task and getting really good at it. Just really good at an overall arching thought process. So really good at push-ups. You know what I mean? And today I do push-ups this way, and tomorrow I do push-ups that way. And I don't really care much of it other than exploring that pathway of it. And ultimately it's going to express itself as some cool advanced calisthenic drill I want to do maybe for a fucking month, and then I don't care about later. But that's a thought process on it.
Yeah. I love how you related that to the tool, just working in construction and how you solve that problem differently. Before we get out of here, I'd love for you guys to tell people where they can get the Chi-Torque course with the shadow template. Absolutely amazing. I was going to say too, just quickly, Chris, doing push-ups a different way. I'd imagine like doing inside your hands, outside your hands, like just maybe a couple things, just something real quick there. I'd be curious before you guys mentioned the course.
Yeah. So, okay. So just the hand thing you could do with it. So if you're thinking like, if you made a diamond with your hands, like held it together really tight, if you just straight up do a push up with your hands on the ground like that, like pitched up like a tent, there's a good chance it's going to keep you in ET, which will make the push up feel a lot more like a bench press. Like your sternum will touch the floor first. So that would be like a bilateral ET push up. And then if you were to kind of be more flat hand, you could even do like a handstand. Hand bouncer might like cup the ground a little more, and you'll have a little more of that thumb pressure. You would think about like trying to keep a ball under your body and like trying to wrap around the ball as you go down for a push-up, like a hollow push-up. I think a lot of people cue it that way. So that would be like a simple thought of it. And then an expression between the two, which is one I teach at my courses all the time, is we do, you like draw yourself into sort of that like diamond sort of hand or that pitch tent looking thing. And then as you come up through the push-up, you push through the inside edge. So it sort of reacts a little more how the foot would work like on the ground. And it kind of gives you this sense like you're going to do an explosive push-up without doing an explosive push-up.
Oh, that's really cool.
That's an expression of just doing it too. So.
Yeah, it's super good stuff. I mean, I wish this whole conversation too, like just in person, like, hey, show me how you do this lunge and coil and circle. That'd be I'm visually rich, but I know obviously, hey, if people are SoCal, they need to hang out with you, train with you, go to your seminars. Tell me where people can find the Chi-Torque course, because I love it. So I'd love for you guys to mention where people can find that.
Yeah, the Chi-Torque course is there's a link in my bio. No, I don't think there is a link in my bio. Huh. Maybe
I can put it in show notes.
There will be. Yeah, I can send you a link.
Yeah, sounds good.
That'd be easy. But yeah, and then Chris is doing the RMT training certs, which is shows a lot of the torque chains, right?
Yeah, we talk about similar stuff there as well. Yeah.
All right. Well, awesome.
And I'll make sure there's a link in my bio.
Yeah, sounds good. Link. Either of these guys. Yeah,
there is a link on my Instagram. I know that for a fact. For that. So.
To Chi-Torque?
No, no. How do people even do this thing?
Did you Google it? I don't even know if it shows up on Google.
We'll have to find out after we finish the call.
Yeah, you're gonna work on that SEO.
Joel knows where it is.
Yeah, I found it. I had to. Yeah, I sometimes to log in, I have to dig down on my email to find it, but it's there.
You went on the dark web and on the Chi-Torque course.
Yeah, you have to buy it in Bitcoin.
Sure. Yeah, we accept Bitcoin.
All right, guys. Well, hey, it was fantastic having you on. Great talking to you again. Thanks again for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Joel.
Thanks for tuning in to another podcast. I appreciate you being here, and I'll see you next week.